This is in the section of notes in Unit 9, and it's called Age of Anxiety Super PAC. Okay, and it looks like this. I showed it to you yesterday. And it does a really good job of breaking this down into its component parts. And it gives you a lot more than I'm going to give you on each of the individual people. I want to kind of categorize it and talk about it sort of as a whole today. This is the intellectual crossroads stuff that I was telling you about before. The McKay reading that goes along with this is 862 to 870. So if you haven't had a chance to look through that, that's in there as well, and I do want to at least go through some of that stuff too. And then there's a big kind of overview on existentialism that's in here. Then tomorrow and Friday we're going to be looking at literature, art, music, architecture in this period. They call it modernism, but you could also say it's Age of Anxiety art, or Age of Anxiety literature, or Age of Anxiety music. And we'll get to that as well. And yesterday I talked about how there were some key figures in that idea, the emphasis of the irrational. I think there's really 5. I mean, Freud is one that we spent some time on. Then I talked a little bit about Nietzsche yesterday, Sorel, Dostoevsky, and Henri Bergson. Okay? And remember that in that handout that I asked you guys to already read, which was the alternate chapter on Age of Anxiety, that there's really, really pretty in-depth write-ups on each of those figures. So if you have any questions about that, you'll need to kind of square that up. Okay? So, without further ado then, we're gonna kind of address this. I drew this map first period, so let me explain kind of how it works. All right? Remember that the crossroads exists. Okay? And we kind of explain that it's a very good visual for you being kind of stuck in the middle of some rural area with dirt roads that are going in this direction, a path that's going ahead, and a path that you've just taken. And Europe kind of collectively, circa 1919, is sort of at this point. It's a really easy way to kind of figure out how the intellectuals are kind of pairing off and the decisions that they're making, okay, about how they're trying to frame their worldview. All right? The first one is to look backward, okay? Say back to the OG, God, I guess, G-D, however you present it. But it's a path that they had taken at one time, and they're kind of returning back to that path. And I wrote down a handful of figures, and we're going to, we'll at least kind of cover some of them. But the first one, the forerunner's name is Soren Kierkegaard, who was writing in the 1850s, and he's kind of the one that sets out at least this path. And it's really his own version. It's called Christian existentialism. But it is, in fact, a return to faith in God. All right? You're going back to God. You're going back to religion. Because, remember, the mid to late 19th century, it seemed like Europe had kind of gotten past that. Darwin, Comte, the triumph of science, whatever it was. Even the way that they kind of frame this in the reading is it's almost like people were kind of embarrassed to talk about things like Christ's divinity and miracles. It was almost like there was a revision that was even going on among the religious to say, Jesus was just a good moral teacher. But you can ignore, the feeding of the 500, and you can ignore like all of the miracles and all of that stuff, because it's almost like they didn't want to be made fun of. Because the scientists had become so prevailing that coming up with these fantasies, if you will, seems almost absurd. Because everybody was along this scientific track. All right? But remember, you got to Europe 1919, you got to imperialism, you got to pogroms, you got to atrocities in the Congo, you got to, the Mac Daddy of all atrocities, World War I. And everybody's like, well, we rejected religion because we believed that religion had taken us down this, dark path to death and destruction. People in the name of God or in the name of Christianity had been bludgeoning each other for centuries. And we finally said we need a different paradigm, and that's when science and the Age of Enlightenment comes along, except that paradigm took you to 1919, and now all of a sudden it crashes. And that's why we're at the crossroads. Okay, intellectual man, the academia, whatever you want to call it, thinking people are kind of trapped. Where do we go? All right? And that was one of the places that they went. And it's a pretty natural idea, right? Why would people go back to religion? Why do people embrace religion? When do people embrace religion? Yeah. When you've endured some kind of tragedy, when you're at your lowest point, when people are born again, or when they find Jesus. Those are the things that you hear. All right? And so there's even a great quote that's in here from this English novelist named Graham Greene, who converts to Roman Catholicism. And at a time, he was probably an agnostic or an atheist. But after World War I, he converts to Roman Catholicism. And he said, one began to believe in heaven because one believed in hell. That's pretty, they saw it, If somebody said, this is hell, I would imagine looking at some of the battlefields on the Western Front, that if I had a vision of what hell would look like, or watching somebody with their face melted off from some gas attack, or listening to people screaming and writhing and crying, and shell-shocked people in the corner of a trench, I might say, yeah, I've seen hell. So there's got to be some kind of alternative, right? And so people are going back to that world. Now, like I said, the forerunner of that is mid-19th century, this figure named Soren Kierkegaard. And here's what it says, at least in this section. It says, especially after World War I, a number of thinkers and theologians began to revitalize the fundamental beliefs of Christianity. Sometimes called Christian existentialists because they shared the loneliness and despair of atheistic existentialists, they stressed human beings' sinful nature, the need for faith, and the mystery of God's forgiveness. The revival of Christian belief after World War I was fed by the rediscovery of the work of 19th century Danish theologian Soren Kierkegaard, whose ideas became extremely influential. Kierkegaard believed it was impossible for ordinary individuals to prove the existence of God, but he rejected the notion that Christianity was an empty practice. In his classic Sickness Unto Death, Kierkegaard mastered his religious doubts by suggesting that people must take a leap of faith and accept the existence of an objectively unknowable but nonetheless awesome and majestic God. Right? The existentialist aspect of it is that you're not going to find it in a sect. You're not going to find it in a cult. You're not going to find it in the Bible or some other religious book. All right? You're not going to find it in some common, socially, communal form of worship. You're all by yourself in whatever that is. Well, however you embrace God, it's ultimately you making that choice alone. All right? The leap of faith is an acknowledgement that I don't know. All right? Remember, Pascal was kind of like, it's a safe bet. All right? He sort of like recalibrates that idea and says, like, that's the departure of reason. Okay? The problem that a lot of people had is that they were trying to reconcile faith with reason, and he said, there's no point to that. Okay? You are never going to objectively arrive at God. The notion that you would is absurd. But you choose to believe anyway. That's the leap of faith. It's almost like you're on the edge of a cliff and you can't see what's over it, but you do that, you jump. Okay? And you embrace the unknown. But that's, for Kierkegaard, that's what he thought, was the alternative to atheistic despair, was to embrace the unknown. Okay? The other folks that you see on this list, and to various degrees, Gabriel Marcel is mentioned in the Super PAC, Paul Tillich, Jacques Maritain, Karl Barth, Albert Schweitzer, a whole team of people, ex-novelists that are re-embracing religion in the 1920s and 30s. Some of them are going back, like Karl Barth did, to more orthodox forms of Christianity. He's a Protestant theologian. His work was called Church Dogmatics. Right? But he's going back to how Christ is revealed. And, kind of the re-embrace of the entire apparatus of being a worshiper. All right. So some of them they go back to the more familiar forms of religion, more traditional forms of or sects of Christianity. Some of them decide that it's going to be my own, but I'm embracing God. And that makes a whole lot of sense at a time when World War I had kind of rocked everybody's foundations. You go back to what's familiar. Okay? I need to be able to beg forgiveness for what humanity has done to itself. All right? Well, however you want to be able to play that out. Okay? Not everybody thinks that way, but a certain component of the intellectual folk decided to go in that direction. Now, some of them said, let's keep down the path that we've been going, and that's science. Right? So you got to the crossroads, but you just kept going forward. Said we've been on this route since the 1600s. I think we've figured out why we screwed it up. And there's a figure that comes along by the name of Vidkun Stein. All right? And his work is called the Tractatus. All right? So his movement is sometimes called logical empiricism. Sometimes it's called logical positivism. But he believes that science is fine. And the reason why people have started to kind of hate on science is because they don't understand that science got hijacked by philosophers. Philosophers ruined it. Okay? That's the easiest way to explain it. But Vidkun Stein and his group, this is what it says. Adherents of this worldview argued that what we know about human life must be based on rational facts and direct observation. They concluded that theology and most traditional philosophy were meaningless because even the most cherished ideas about God, eternal truth, and ethics were impossible to prove using logic. Okay? And that's where he comes along. He's like Mr. Skeptic. All right. Vidkun Stein argued that philosophy is only the logical clarification of thoughts, and that therefore it should concentrate on the study of language, which expresses thoughts. In his view, the great philosophical issues of the ages, God, freedom, morality, and so on, were quite literally senseless, a great waste of time, for neither scientific experiments nor mathematical logic could demonstrate their validity. Statements about such matters reflected only the personal preferences of given individuals. And there's a quote from Vidkun Stein that says, "Of what one cannot speak, of that one must keep silent." In other words, tell the philosophers to shut up and stop talking about things and start and saying these are true because, as if they are verifiable proofs. So their version of science is an uncontaminated one. Okay? One where the metaphysicians, one where the philosophers, you can almost make an argument that it's kind of like recalibrating Auguste Comte, who was the positivist from the middle of the 19th century. But this group of folks are like, there's nothing wrong with science. In fact, if we could just stick to it and then not try to, proof God or proof truth or proof morality or proof ethics, we'll be fine. Okay? Stick to the facts. And remember that the new physicists are coming along and saying, yeah, but those facts aren't really facts either. And they're like, shh. No, they are. Let's just go on this path. So there was a lot of folks, and this was mostly in England and the United States. This wasn't a really popular continental philosophy. Okay, the continent was kind of torn between going back to Christianity or going back to some form of religion or dumping everything and setting sail on the unknown. Okay, and the third version is the paths not traveled. Okay, so if you look backward, you got God and religion, and this crew decided to go backward and look for religion. If you kept going forward, you followed Vidkun Stein and his group of logical positivists, and if you dumped both, and the people that fall into that category, the forerunners, are Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche, to a lesser extent Dostoevsky, and then after World War II, or World War I, Martin Heidegger, Karl Jaspers, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus. They were the ones that said, reject them both. Okay? So one said, go back to religion. The other said, nah, stay with science. These guys said, they're both absurd. Okay? There are no values. There are no higher meanings. Okay? These folks want to derive meaning from science. These folks are going back to God for the answers. These people say there aren't any answers. Okay? We live in an incomprehensible void. We are alone in the universe. There are no absolutes. There are no universals. There are no answers. We don't know why we're here. We don't know who created us. We don't know what the reason for living is. Okay? This is all random, chaotic jumbles of nonsense. Some of them decided, I can't deal with it. I can't handle that. I need to have answers. I need to know that my life means something. I need to know that there's a plan. All right? And when you're told that there is no plan, everything is haphazard and reckless and random, and cruel, awful things happen to good people all the time, and there's not a damn thing anybody can do about it, they say, what's the point? And maybe they decide to just kind of end it. All right? The others, the more liberatory ones, and you could make an argument that Nietzsche is a liberatory one. Okay? You could certainly make an argument that Jean-Paul Sartre is a liberatory one. You could make an argument that Simone de Beauvoir is a liberatory one. Not Camus. All right. But they're the ones that say, okay, liberatory means that you can accept the fact that life is replete with meaning, and that now that that's done, you can go about creating that meaning for yourself. Okay? You alone get to define your life through the actions and choices that you make. And so that's the next move that comes along. Does that make sense to people? Okay. So,
why is Camus not considered part of that?
Because I don't think all Camus really did is define the absurd. I didn't see a lot of work of Camus that was actually excited about trying to anoint some type of life force through the meaninglessness of life. Okay? Sartre and others were like, now we can truly act and we have all the freedom in the world to do that. All right? We're not tied down by God's plan, and we're not tied down by some other universal maxim. All I have is me, but that's all I need. Okay? I think the Camus, the anti-heroes of Camus and Dostoevsky, I don't see a whole lot of liberatory aspects to that.
So
I think that they're sort of, this is cruel, this is random. I think Dostoevsky, at least to some extent, is like me rebelling is at least me being able to be me. But I don't know about Camus. I think Camus is just kind of like pointing out the absurdity of everything, and then it's poignant because Camus ends up dying in a car crash. It's just like perfect.
Yeah.
What was the opening lines of The Stranger?
My mom died today, or was it yesterday?
Right. I mean, that's just like, come on, dude, it's your mom.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what it says. Most existential thinkers were atheists, often inspired by Nietzsche. They did not believe that a supreme being had established humanity's fundamental nature and given life its meaning. In the words of French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, existence precedes essence. By that, Sartre meant that there are no God-given, timeless truths outside or independent of individual existence. Only after they are born do people struggle to define their essence, entirely on their own. According to thinkers like Sartre and his lifelong partner Simone de Beauvoir, existence itself is absurd. Human beings are terribly alone, for there's no God to help them. They are left to confront the inevitable arrival of death, and so are hounded by despair. That's the angst, the existential crisis. All right? The shattering of the beliefs in God, reason, and progress. When you've killed all of those things and said they don't exist, remember, Nietzsche killed God. All right? At least intellectually, he killed God. All right? Assassinated the Easter Bunny. All right? Wiped out Santa Claus. All right? But they said, at the same time, existentialists recognized that human beings must act in the world. In the words of Sartre, man is condemned to be free. Because life is meaningless, existentialists believe that individuals are forced to create their own meaning and define themselves through their actions. Such radical freedom is frightening, and Sartre concluded that most people try to escape it by structuring their lives around conventional social norms. Or some people are so frightened that they're begging for somebody to come along and provide meaning. That's why there was such vulnerability to the cult of personality people. You know, the Mussolinis, the Stalins, the Hitlers, Bono, you know, okay, or other, you know, false prophets, like whoever made that damn game. Right. Such radical freedom is frightening. According to Sartre, to escape is to live in bad faith, to hide from the hard truths of existence. To live authentically, individuals must become engaged and choose their own actions in full awareness of their responsibility for their own behavior. That sucks for a lot of people. Because if that's true, and you are fully engaged in defining your life through your own choices and actions, what can't there be? Excuses. There cannot be excuses. Teachers to blame. My coach is a hard ass. My parents are overbearing. Okay? The man did it. Blame the government. Okay? It's usually the man. All right? But you're always looking for outside influences to say, you know, I've had a hard life because of blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I mean, the existentialists in the truest form are like, wherever you are, you embrace what you are and you authenticate yourself through the choices that you make. Okay? Even if it seems unreasonable to say, you know, I mean, you're still going to have the Enlightenment pushback that says your choices unfortunately get framed through the environment. The existentialists will bear through that and say that's nonsense. Right? I am truly free. Even if I am suffering, I am free to act in this suffering. You still have people like Viktor Frankl, who was writing as a Holocaust survivor living in a concentration camp and talking about existentialism within the context of the suffering that he had every single day of his existence in a concentration camp. That you can control the way that you approach living in a concentration camp, or living in a prison, or living in whatever. Right? So those are the arcs. Okay? Everybody's embracing different things. You've got Christian existentialists, you've got atheist existentialists, you got the pro-science people, you got the back to religion people, you got the dump both and develop a new frame people. But you can certainly see that 1919 is chaotic. The 20s and 30s and 40s. People didn't really know what to do. All right? Some people still don't know what to do. They don't know what the right answers are. Okay? You kind of go back and look at it. You know, is it, was science right? You know, did society go wrong the minute it turned its back on God? Some people believe that. Some people embrace the idea that if you look for meaning in a meaningless world, you're committing folly. You know, every single day there will be something that will happen where people will say, "Yeah, I get it. God's plan." Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions about this? But that is the anxiety. Okay, that's kind of why they call it what they call it. And the people that we talked about on Monday and Tuesday were contributing to that anxiety because they were undermining the systems that were in place to try to provide meaning for the world. You understand what I'm talking about? If science is like the baseline and that we can build on that and we can perfect humankind, but then you take science and you're like, wrong, wrong, wrong. And then you come along, well, at least we're in the age of reason, and man is an inherently rational person, and if we can craft institutions around man's inherent rationality, we will progress as a society. And somebody comes along and says, wrong, human beings aren't really rational. They're perverse, irrational, animalistic, id-driven, impulsive people that look to destroy other people if they're not stopped. And you're like, damn. Huh? That's Freudian. All right. There's an unbelievable quote from Freud. Can I give it to you?
Yes.
Oh, this is the best.
Man, Freud is a good guy.
Freud is a badass, but listen to this argument. Okay. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. People are not good by nature, as philosophers had taught, but are predisposed to behave cruelly and brutally. They are creatures among whose instinctual endowments is to be reckoned a powerful share of aggressiveness. Their first inclination is not to love their neighbor, but to satisfy their aggressiveness on him, to exploit his capacity for work without compensation, to use him sexually without his consent, to seize his possessions, to humiliate him, to cause him pain, to torture, and to kill him.
It's accurate.
That's what Freud believes is the replacement for love thy neighbor. Is to humiliate, torture, kill, seize possessions. That's your instinct. Okay? And if it's not, that's because civilization has imposed all of these penalties. He hates it. He hates that would be the default. Does that sound Hobbesian?
Yes.
Abso-freaking-lutely it does.
Very much.
Okay? That was the original position. Man is selfish, cruel. If left to his own devices, he would devour everything that came in its path. Okay?
So did Freud believe in enlightened despotism?
No.
What?
Freud believed that that you had to figure out a way to control it. Okay?
Enlightened despotism.
You had to try to figure out some nice, kind outlets for people to be able to use their energies, but to do it instead of in a destructive way, to figure out a way to do it in a productive way.
Is that why he was into sex so much?
Huh?
Is that why he was into sex so much?
I don't know. I suppose. I mean, yes, there was a baseline that says it always goes back to sex. But, yeah, I mean, you have to find ways to get them to take those creative passions and impulses and turn them towards some good. Make a picture. But I want to kill him. No, make a picture. So, sit on the couch. Tell me why you feel the way that you do.
Let me psychoanalyze you.
All right. That's all I got. Joni, you want to turn that off? All right. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is, if you look on the board here, so just kind of going